it says like we're up. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, I think we're good.
We're live.
Joshua, we are live. We're
Yeah.
live. Look at us. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming back to Lumastic Live this morning. Thanks for spending your Friday morning with us. I hope you have a nice beverage, whether water or whatever caffeinated drink you drink in the morning, to have a lovely conversation with me and Joshua about kind of our educational system and what we can learn from kind of the like online learning communities of the internet, especially the kind of the dominant culture that creators do of sharing things they know. So we're gonna have a lovely conversation this morning. As always, leave your thoughts in the chat. We had a great time last week engaging with all of you, taking questions and hearing your thoughts. So please keep them coming. So Joshua, let's start out maybe first of all with like, how are you? You're about to graduate. You're about to
Yes,
graduate
it's crazy.
college.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I told Drew before this, it's a good morning because one of my favorite artists dropped, so it's like good music. But yeah, I graduate next Friday. More excited to just see some like friends for last bit of time before like more people move on to do more adulting things and be,
And
I
before
guess,
you start more school.
yeah, before I start more school. But yeah, and so I guess really for me, everyone's like teased me. They're like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to go get a job," and then they look at me and they're like, "You're just going to more school," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'll feel the same struggle in like a year." Um, but yeah, no, it's been great week. Going to see my mom today. She's flying in from London, and so I'm super pumped about that as well.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
this is so cool. It's always very exciting to me. So, you know this, and maybe all the people watching this stream know this, but uh, did Sarah make that mug? It's beautiful. Sarah did not make this mug, but it does have an S on it. So um, you're all good. Do you want to put in headphones so you can hear us? Thanks. What was I saying, Joshua? Oh, it was just that I used to be on the team that would record graduation, and so like UVA's graduation is like this big spectacle. Everybody is walking the lawns. There's like all the balloons, so all the parents can see, and so I just like I'm in love with the mood of graduation. The fact that everybody's parents are there. I think it's also because I've been conditioned to like hunt out people crying during graduation. So I like have seen like the most extreme emotive response,
Really?
and so now I'm like, oh, this is so heartwarming, like so sweet. Yeah, so I'm excited for you. It's a really fun thing, and I'm glad that right the class of 2020, right, Faith, who I think is in the stream watching, she and Chelsea, actually I forgot about that, they didn't get to experience like the full graduation thing, so it's cool that they're combining forces 2020
Yeah.
2021 to have this like mega graduation.
Yeah, I feel so bad for the class of 2020. I was literally just talking to my friends about it. Like they really went, COVID happened and then it was like poof, like to
Yeah,
graduation and everything. And so last minute, like it was like everything switched up so quickly in the spring.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so pour one out, but it's gonna be a great thing. Hopefully the weather, knock on wood, is just cloudy and no rain.
Yeah.
Because that would be a big yike.
It would. I don't know. I guess it would probably be canceled at that point.
Yeah, which I exactly would be so sad.
Yeah. Big
Oh
L.
Lord, big yike.
Yeah.
Oh Lord. All right. Well, for those of you just joining us in the stream, today Joshua and I are going to be talking about kind of what our educational institutions can learn from the online learning communities that have sparked off up with the internet. And so, Joshua, maybe like I don't know. I'm playing now the questioner here. Like you give me, because right, if for those of you who don't know, Joshua is also the co-founder of Ripple, which is a company that is designed to help right now specifically like pre-med students like explore like jobs in that industry, to figure out like what they would like to do, because as we all know, it's a big problem that like a bunch of people that are literally spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to leave a place to go get a job don't even know what job they want or what's out there.
Great.
um So yeah, I know Joshua has a lot of thoughts on like higher education and then like our educative models as a whole. But Joshua, give us like your first hot take on like your experiences as a student, right? As you kind of wrap the first era of your education career and start a new one, like but also as somebody who like learns a shit ton of stuff on the internet, like
Yeah.
give us your hot take, give us your high level thoughts on like this process.
I mean, I think just like all together, it says a lot that like in my 4 years of college, the thing that's I've really retained is everything I've learned from either working with like a startup, so like even Lumastic, Arena Labs. In BME, I did learn, I would say a lot, but I would say not nearly as fast as when I like delved into stuff on my own. And
Mm,
so, and the reason why I feel that is just because the way kind of like just syllabus, this the syllabus that like schools usually use, it's not really there for you to like really explore what you want to explore, like probe questions as much, because I'm sure it's like they have to fit in a bunch of students.
yeah.
But like I've learned so much, even technical stuff that is BME related, just through like Arena Labs when I had to research stuff on my own, and you're kind of just given a task and like they check in with you like a product manager does, and you work
Hmm.
towards that. But it's like very different working towards the grade just in general. I don't know if I have some professors who are like, I'm not in love with grades. And obviously I've grown to love their classes because it's very like
Hmm.
project based. And I felt like I've honestly learned more in their classes because like my motivation's different in that class.
Right.
But I understand that like it's easier for people to kind of slack off in those environments. But I just think that like there's a lot to be learned by the way people are able to learn stuff like so quickly,
Yeah.
just again like we were talking about through like YouTube videos, or people will sign up for YouTube courses and actually or like creator courses and
Yeah.
learn a lot that way really fast. And
Yeah.
that's like my
And
initial first hot take, I guess.
yeah, no, exactly. I've had the same experience. I used to tell um uh people that like everything I've learned on YouTube. Like this is going back to high school, like because there were no filmmaking or like animation, any of those courses at my school. I learned them all on the internet, right? I've literally. Oh no, that's not true. I took one class at UVA that was in the architecture school on how to use Maya, which is like the 3D rigging and 3D animation software. And the reason that they use Maya in the architecture school is so that they can import models of houses and stuff, and then use a camera to like go through the house
Mm,
to like show clients. And I went in there and was like, I want to make movies. Like, as like a weird CS kid taking this architecture class over the summer, right?
yeah.
But it was like the greatest class I had. It's like the reason I got my job at the Smithsonian and like all these things. So, like I'm grateful for that. But I will say this everything else, right? The things that got me my job in high school as a web developer, the reason that I was like tenacious enough to do the thing I said on the Lumastic Live, I guess that was last week or 2 weeks ago, with like the drone that like fell out of the sky to record it, right?
Yeah.
Like all these things were because I had watched a ton of YouTube videos from people like Freddie Wong, Griffin Hammond, like Indie Mogul, like back when that was a thing. It's yeah, it's huge. And I think it's really interesting what you're talking about as um, like the working for something versus working for a grade. What's really interesting is like in behavioral science, and like Chelsea, please chime in the chat here, because I'm sure you've learned more things than me about this. But like the difference between those modes is like literally working for a reward versus working to have something be taken away, right? Because like with a grade, how currently how we've structured grading is like people basically start with an A and then they get detracted down,
Yeah.
right? And in the opposite, right, what's happening is you're going for a reward. You're being rewarded as you go along in terms it, when you work for like a company or you work on a project or whatever, because you get little wins, right? It's a build
Yeah.
up versus a tear down. What's super interesting is like people are experimenting with different ways of like structuring classroom grading so that it more is like that. Like Mark Sheriff over at UVA has this product called Gamer Card, which is basically like imagine if grades were a video game, and all of the projects, all of the assignments, everything were listed as challenges, and everything had an XP value associated with it, and you just did challenges to bump up your XP, and your XP corresponded with an end grade,
Yeah.
right? It's just a conversion. And what's wild is like the success rate of students when you do it that way, right? Because you've given them choice, agency, you've given them like clear direction of like, if you do this, this will go up,
Yeah.
right? Like people are way more motivated. It's a positive motivator versus a negative motivator, right? Like positive is you're adding something into the environment, negative is you're taking something away, not necessarily good and bad, right? Which is usually how we think about it. Yeah, and so this like idea that working on a project like outside of school, right, is like then driven by positive motivators, intrinsic motivators. Yeah, it's just huge. So it's cool to like start off this conversation with that kind of like atmosphere of like, let's first dissect like why we feel better when we're like devouring YouTube videos for 4 hours versus like when we sit in a lecture for 50 minutes,
Yeah.
right? Because one might even be more efficient, right? That's what I find really interesting about all these creators that are putting out courses is like now the experience of like you used to have to go through like 4 hours of YouTube videos to watch a bunch of tutorials to get like the thing you wanted. Now creators are seeing like, oh, if I just like put out a course on Skillshare that goes step by step how I do this thing, right? People get it way faster. There's like so much motivation that people will pay for it, right? It's like this
Yeah.
whole new monetization stream. It's so cool. Good morning, Faith. Good morning, Chelsea. Vids or it didn't happen. Uh, he made the cutest short film. Yes, it's on my YouTube channel, Chelsea. You can go see it. Sarah calls it, or my mom calls it my sad I Miss Sarah movie because that summer I took that animation course was also the first summer that Sarah and I were apart, which is like wild to think about because she was studying abroad in Ireland. And so I made this like up inspired like video basically about like what it's called Disconnected. It's basically like what it's like to have a long distance relationship. It's like quite depressing, but
I'm gonna write it down.
yeah. Yeah. And Chelsea, if you have access to edit the video description, that might be a good thing to put down below for people to check out. Good morning, Faith. Faith, we were congratulating all of our 2020 and 2021 graduates earlier, so congratulations. Although we are sad to see you graduate and leave us, we are happy for you. Okay, so Joshua, what do you think about that concept now that we're talking about this like operant and classical conditioning aspect of this, like the
Yeah.
sociological part of it, which I find so fun.
I think that's it's such a better structure and like a big problem I have is like even with like exams for like the hard courses, like I took Orgo, right? And
Hmm.
like that was the one class like I studied my butt off for the final and like obviously didn't get like the grade I wanted, but like the thing
Yeah.
that it's really cool by doing it challenge structure is like people can go back and try again
Try again.
and then it'll like click because after that final exam happened, the L was took, and I was like, all right, I never like went back and thought about the
Right, you have
like
to just
mistake.
sit with that failure. The thing
Yeah,
that you leave with, right? The feeling you leave with at the end of the course is like, wow, I suck,
yeah,
right? Which like is so stupid for the way that our brains work. Like it's bizarre that we structure stuff that way.
yeah. And like I know if it was like another way around or there was like a second semester, it's kind of like you're doing the challenges up to it, that it would stick with me way more because that's what you ultimately they don't really like emphasize that much in education how much you learn from the failures, but the important thing you learn from the failures by doing it again and then actually getting it right. It's just like in code like coding, like your code doesn't work,
Yeah.
you try again, and when it does work, I mean that's 100% you learned something because you failed. And
Yes.
so that's not the same in the way like tests are structured in most.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I just think that it is so bizarre that we've known a lot of this stuff for so long, and yet like because of our traditional mindset of academia, like we refuse to change, even though like academics are the ones that figured out a lot of this stuff, right? The way that we learn behavioral science, so it's just like really weird that we recognize, and like you go up to anyone on the street and you're like, how was your time in school? And they'll be like, oh man, it sucked, right? You just have to
Yeah.
endure it, right? like,
Yeah.
like when, I don't know if you remember this, but we had this program where kids from like the middle and high school would like come to our elementary school and like tell us what to expect, like when we were sixth graders and stuff, and like tell us what to expect in the transition. And like constantly the thing that is told is like, yeah, it just sucks, but you just got to get through it.
Yeah. I do remember that. They would like come to your, for us, it was like they come to the gym and then we all see them and
Right.
yeah.
You just hang out and you ask questions and like
Yeah.
yeah, but I will say it like creates, I think, a great sense of camaraderie, that I find super interesting, right? It's the whole you see this a lot, this idea of shared struggle with like military combat units, right? It's like you might hate, like in another context you might like hate the guy next to you, right? They have like entirely different values, like political beliefs, whatever it is, but you put yourself in like a situation where you have to breed trust or like you will die, right? Bad things
Yeah.
will happen to you, right? Then immediately like you start to like restructure your social standing and like work together, right? And I feel like that does happen a lot in schools, right?
Yeah.
Like and I think there's this like pivot point where like in elementary school, um like so this is all also coming. I wrote like a big old paper, everyone, about all these shenanigans. But so I'm like pulling from that. But I'm sorry if I get anything wrong or whatever. Fact check me later. But like there's this pivot point that happens in like childhood development where you start seeing yourself as like a an independent like operator, right? Like you start to have your own like thoughts, feelings, beliefs starting to form. And usually this is when like it's like in adolescence when you pivot from like wanting to please your immediate familial or authoritative figures, and you start to actually want to build your own sense of authority by like building relationships with your peers, right? And so it's really interesting that like in middle and high school, right, like you start to see this like it's now us versus the teachers, right? Us
Yeah.
versus the administration. Whereas like no third grade elementary school student is like wandering around like starting to start a revolution, right? But
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like you do start to see that happen in high school. And I think that the fact that there is a common enemy for those like for kids growing up, I think that that's actually super interesting in terms of like how we then go through that social development. I don't know, I'm now derailing, but I just think that's so fascinating.
No, on that point, I think it's that's so funny. I was literally just talking about shared struggle because I my friend Shreyash, he's in comm school, and so I was just asking him like what comms like, because the comm stereotype is like kind of cutthroat people,
Yeah,
like all like I wondered, I was like, are they backstabbing, like does the competition get to you? And he was
right.
like, no, it's actually like we all bond really well in our block. And he was just explaining like how in his block like there were so many assignments, and like during ICE, which is like their big third year class thing, he was like, our block got so close because we were just like, what are these final assignments, like this is just
Yeah,
ridiculous. And they're really like, I've seen them live in action, like the at least block two, and they are, it's so interesting, like compared to BME, it's like night and day difference of how they like operate, move, like they're stark
they're
differences
a
between
team.
people. Yeah,
They're a team.
there's literally like they have, and they're like you said, like complete, some of them complete opposites, like you would
Yeah,
not think they're friends, or they would
yeah,
be
exactly.
friends, but it's like, yeah, it's like,
They create this bond,
yeah,
right? And it's because they're given like a thing to go do together. I want to like point out in the chat because Faith, like I keep forgetting, like we have some experts here in the chat, like Chelsea studied cognitive science, and Faith just finished her master's in higher education. That's what she's
That's
graduating
so
with
cool.
this year. So Faith says, I feel like there's a big disconnect between academics studying education versus academics actually teaching. I totally agree with you, Faith. This is like one of the biggest problems that I know you know with higher education is that like we're hiring people who are really good at publishing papers and getting your brand as an institution to look really good, but then the actual educative quality of how it feels to the students is like completely put aside because again it's a non-competitive marketplace and people will just pay money for the clout. Okay, and then Faith says like the people actually teaching students, especially at the college level, have never been taught how to teach students. Yes, this is a big old problem. Like I don't remember the stat, Faith, maybe you could Google it for us, of like the amount of professors in academic institutions that actually have a master's degree in teaching, right? Versus like that's a requirement to teach in most public schools. Super wild. Yeah. And then Faith says, sounds like Erickson's psychosocial development model. Yes, Faith. Yes,
That's
Faith. Coming in with spitting facts. Spitting
that.
facts here at Faith. And then Sarah said, as a reply, like, yes, Faith, college professors need better training and support on how to teach instead of pressure to keep their academic output high. Exactly. It's all about incentive structures, baby.
I think I mean that's such a great point, and I see it in BME. I mean BME, they're all researchers. Like I don't
Yeah.
honestly know. The only professor I think who actually loves to teach is a full-time professor,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Yeah,
because
and
that's
that's what happens in the CS department. Most of the Aaron, shout out to Aaron Bloomfield, Mark Sheriff, Nate Brunell. All of those teachers are like adjuncts. They're not like hired or tenured professors. They're not on any tenure track, but they're the best. Mark Florian, right? But they're the best teachers, right? And it's just again, it's so interesting how we're trying to attract it goes back to like what is the point of like university, right? And then if we extrapolate like what is the point of the school,
yeah.
right? Is it to actually give a great social emotional and like knowledge development to a student, right? Or like is it to make yourselves look really good and make a bunch of money, right? And like that I feel like is one of the segments of the conversation around publicizing higher education that doesn't get a lot of like talk, right? We always talk about how expensive it is to go to college as like the reason we should make it like a kind of complete public option, or like make college free, right? Like access to a college degree free. But I don't think we talk about how in doing that and then in like deciding what the incentives like are for the institutions, like they're no longer out to just like be a money making machine, right? They're now out to like actually provide a good experience to students so that we can like have good democratic citizens like go on and do cool stuff, right? That's the good thing, right? It's not just that it's now
Yeah.
cheap, right? It's that it's also cheap and better because of creating that system. But again, we should defer to our experts in the chat
Yeah.
especially Faith, about where I'm going wrong with that model or what she thinks about it. But what do you think about it, Joshua? In the meantime, while Faith is typing.
Like in terms of the like what specifically like the incentive structures for
Yeah, like what
yeah.
like the point, yeah, exactly what the point of school is, right? And like how we see this detraction between public then and kind of private or pseudo private institutions. Like what's your experience been like? Like compare your experience as a student in high school, like dealing with like teachers and stuff, versus your experience in college maybe.
Yeah, I think in high school, I mean actually in college is one thing I would probably say about the whole structure where like they bring on faculty to mostly do research and then like they have to teach as a result. I think the one thing that is cool and would be cool is that like a lot of people, at least in BME, they want to go do research with these people, which is like gives them something to work towards. But I think the only really way that's effective is if it's like those people who want to do research, they bring them on to just solely do research. And
Yeah.
what they can do is make it maybe like a capstone class or like the research for credit, because that's where a lot of my friends have learned the most working with the faculty, actually, is research
Just
for
working on a project, doing
yeah.
doing research,
And
like
and
making
frank
stuff happen.
and frankly, the faculty, they like to do their research, so they end up becoming better teachers at it because that's the thing they know best versus like
Hmm.
how to teach, or like they know how to teach subjects, but at least in the undergrad level, like some are pretty general. Like I had Professor Hiley's one of my like, I guess I would say closest professors, like just love the guy. He teaches biotransport, but like it's still like it relates to it, but he still has to kind of like go through the curriculum and make sure everything's good. And same with like the other professors. Um, but I learned a lot through research or credit through him.
Mm.
And he loves research, and he's still trying to get the hang of teaching and wants to be a good teacher. But it just kind of shows that model, if they brought on faculty for two separate reasons, like
Yeah.
and really focused in on bringing people to teach, and then bringing people who want to do projects to do projects, because there's a great benefit to learning from that. But then when they bring them on and kind of do this like half and half thing, so I don't think like like it sometimes works. Some professors are good at it, but like it's hit or miss, like, and that shouldn't be the way education is. It should be like the people that want to teach, the people who want to do research.
Yeah.
um
Exactly. Like you
yeah,
find the thing that they're best in, and then yeah, stick them on that, right? Like it's again, it's creating environments just like you would do with a company where people find the things they're really good at and then like get really good at those, right? In the
yeah,
context of like the goals and missions of the organization. Okay, so Sarah asked Faith to explain Erickson's psychosocial development model, and Faith said somewhat irrelevant now, and Drew went on a different direction than I was anticipating. But he said children shift their main connections and affirmation from male and it sounds like Erickson. Yeah, Drew, I spaced out when I was typing that. Sorry. Faith, no worries. No, that's great. I'm not gonna try to say I remember exactly what Erickson's model is, but it is this idea that like our our brains start to develop and learn things based on our social environment. It's one of these like at least if I remember this correctly, Faith, you can tell me if I'm wrong. One of these things that like a lot of educators talk about as the nature versus nurture concept. Like, are kids like inherently smart, or are they like products of their environment? And so Erickson's thing was basically like, if you see how people behave differently in different groups, that proves, right, that people learn different behaviors based on the context that they're in, right? Which is like a point for nurture. Yeah, but again, Faith, you can tell me if that's wrong or if I'm thinking about somebody else. But to tie it back here to then what I think like is super interesting about how this ties into kind of our creator economy, right? Our collaborative economy, right? It's that the reason that these institutions existed in the first place was because they were the gates of knowledge, right? They were the libraries, right? They were the only places that you could gain these resources and information and have them disseminated to you, right? Like that's literally from the dawn of compulsory
yeah,
education and even education as an institution. That's been the thing. Now, because of the internet, everyone is both a teacher and a learner at like the same time. There is like no strict occupation when a YouTuber does like a YouTube tutorial that like a, let's say a freelance animator, right? Like they decide to, I'm going to show you how to do the bouncing ball in After Effects, right? They go through, they do the tutorial. They are both a freelancer, right? They are both a YouTube creator, right? Somebody who's like making entertainment value on the internet, and a teacher, right? Like,
yeah,
and that this like combo of like what you're saying, Joshua, with then you find the things that people are really good at and then ask them to teach other people those things, right? People who are really good at research that might not be great at lecturing teaching, but you put them in a lab environment and they can really walk around and like show everybody how things work and like get really animated and super cool, right? Like that's it, right? Like that's what we're doing. And I think it's really cool that now all of a sudden like we can create structures where people have access to like the best teachers for them, like people that make them feel inspired and like get them to want to learn the things that they want to learn, right, from anywhere, right? It's
yeah,
so cool. Like there's obviously a lot of limitations, and something I talked about in my thesis was basically like online education is going to be really, really, really awesome. it already is, but like we're gonna make it really awesome when we also combine it with the social aspect of like everybody is getting in a room together and like talking about stuff, right? Building
Yeah.
social bonds with like I don't know, mixed age groups, like all these things we have to do as like human societies in the like the real world, right? Being able to do that in combination with online education, right? Like because really the thing that online education is really good at is, and when I talk about online education, I'm not just talking about like Zoom. I'm not talking about Zoom lecture. I'm talking about like you looking up a YouTube tutorial on how to like start a blog, right? Like all that stuff is like online education, online inspired learning. Um, and what that's going to be really good at and is already really good at is the dissemination of knowledge, right? It's just then the second component of this, which is like the absorption of that knowledge and then the production of creative work because of that information. That's the stuff that then we need to restructure all of our institutions to be able to do better, inspired by the internet, right? The fact that like now it is not I am the gatekeeper, I am the library. It is now, hey, the library is everywhere. Go figure out the shit that you like to do, and then come here and I'll like help you make the things or do whatever you want to
Yeah.
do with that information. But what do you think about that, Joshua? I'm going to read the chat while you talk.
Oh yeah, I mean I like that structure personally. We had a discussion in my open source class when we had like a discussion about like open source education. We briefly talked about like what it kind of like the online environment is, and I think like and its benefits, right? Like there are a lot of benefits. Like frankly, people who do school, right, regardless, they'll in their free time when they're studying or doing anything, or they're either watching videos from the current professor or
Mm-hmm.
just roaming the internet for other videos for like how other people are doing tutorials, whether it's like differential equations or all you're watching a Khan Academy video as you're preparing for the MCAT or like
Mm-hmm.
all these things. But then yeah, and then these institutions at the end, because there is benefit to sitting in a room talking to people, very like I think it's much drastically like I've even noticed a night and day difference in my open source class, which became in person at the end of the semester. Our conversations in person were just like so much better, but that's just because of like it's easier to sense like cues when to talk versus on Zoom. And then but yeah, so taking that, so like doing exactly what you said, and then these institution structuring after you've done your learning and stuff like that, going and either talking and kind of like
Synthesizing. Yeah.
synthesizing your thoughts or building something or getting in a room with people and then collaborating and really like the thing that's in this sense it's kind of like a big maker space. And so the internet's already the knowledge space, and then you can go in person, have these conversations, make really cool stuff. So I think that's like a much better structure. And I mean, we did it for our open source class, and I thought it was really cool. Like we had an open source, like we did a project, or we attempted a project this semester. Didn't end up working because like the circuit pretty much fried when we were trying to do something, and it was really funny. But lesson learned, right? And that's what the
Black
professor
smoke of
said.
death, right?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was it was so funny. Like all of a sudden we saw like a little smoke and we were just like, oh, there goes our open source project. But like it was we were testing water for like purity and wanted
Mm,
to like we got like all the CAD files from like Thingiverse, got the code, like we're tweaking it.
so
And we were
fun.
doing that on our own, right? On your own, then you go in person and everyone's talking, making stuff. That's gonna be like memorable for me. And I think that's
Yeah.
what every class should be like.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
you have some sense of ownership and a product at the end. Faith had a great thing in the chat that I think ties in well here. It's like to play devil's advocate. I think an advantage of formalized school is knowing that your teachers have some sort of credentials, which make it more likely that you're learning the right thing. She goes on to give an example like for Photoshop or videos, like learning will speak for itself because if you've produced the thing you wanted to produce, then right, you like can trust that the person with the skill like knows the thing. She says though, but if I want to become a chemical engineer, I want to be sure that I'm learning the correct processes because it can be dangerous if I'm wrong. I agree. I think that this is not so much a devil's advocate against online education. I think this is an advocating for some sense of new credentialing model, right? To like say this person knows what they know, right? And like that's the thing that we currently do with degrees, right? So like if somebody's now making YouTube videos saying like, "Hi, I'm a chemical engineer. I have a PhD in like doing this thing, whatever, from this university," right? That's credentials I can trust. I can watch these videos and like bada bing, bada boom,
Yeah.
right? The thing I think we're really talking about is like, hey, in this like, I guess different world, how do we do credentialing in a way that like you can you have some sort of like centralized or decentralized, right? Like institution that says like here's the stamp of approval that like this person knows this thing, right? I will say like even in terms of like chemical engineering, let's like so if the example is like dangerous if wrong, right? Let's take then like machining or woodworking as an example, right? Big scary power tools, like you could cut yourself and die if like you're doing things wrong, right? If somebody has been doing something for a really long time, can show produced work that like is similar to the work that I want to do, right? I can trust that they know what they're doing, right? That being said, a lot of then people that are doing all these YouTube tutorials are not really taking safety precautions all the time into account.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things that they get flacking in the comments for is like, hey, you shouldn't be wearing like a floppy t-shirt when you use your table saw, right? Like all this stuff. So I think that there also is a thing to be said for like the way that we did credentialing before credentialing, which was like social credentialing, right? It was trust.
Yeah.
Right, like that still happens even in an online environment, so I think it can be a combination of both, right? It's like the we have some sort of like trusted institution that then produces little trust tokens, and also this idea that like hey, this person on the internet gets a lot of flack for a lot of stuff, right? So maybe like that's a sign that I should take the things that they say with a grain of salt or whatever it is. Like I don't think with any solution to like education you're going to get things that are perfect, because uh, education is literally the process of like inspiring people to like make connections with knowledge, which is like a really complicated process because everybody's brain is super unique. And so you're never going to get something perfect that works for everyone. Even the like little AI school people like are not going to get it right, because one of the biggest things that like people need to learn is, right, that social dynamic, right? The idea that I can interact with other people to do stuff, right? A lot of the AI school heads, I think are completely missing that because they're all like up in their brain, right? They don't understand that literally like we don't live in little vacuum sealed things of like we're only ever interacting with the world on the internet. Like that's a bad thing to think of as the ideal. Yeah, so I think it's like a little combination of both. Sarah said, would love to hear you talk about how the pandemic has given education a bad rap, or online education a bad rap. Yeah, I think that what it proved is like we don't have very good tools. Like a lot of like against online education, like online education naysayers have used this as an opportunity to be like, look, it doesn't work. But really, I think what's been happening is like, hey, when we tried to translate exactly what we did in the classroom onto an online platform, it didn't work, right? When really it's, hey, let's now use the new tools at our disposal to restructure the ways that we do like learning, right? Like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Watching a Zoom lecture is worse than watching an in-person lecture, right? You get worse outcomes, right? All these things. But the solution is not, look, we can only do school in person, right? It's the maybe lectures are bad, right? Like we're coming to
Yeah.
false conclusions. But Joshua, you've been dealing with this for like a year and a
Yeah.
half. Like, what do you see? Like, what have you experienced, and what do you think? Do you think the bad rap is warranted, or what do you think?
I mean, I think the Zoom lecture bad rep is, yeah, warranted. Like Zoom lectures were beyond some of the worst things like you had to sit through, because you're literally just like, it's so easy to detach like from your computer, and a
Mm.
lot of times it led me to doing other work, which is interesting. Like I'll just be
Mm.
doing other work, like I would be doing Ripple work during classes, your
I
ears
did
kind
that
of
in
going.
in-person classes too,
Yeah.
so I feel
Yeah, it's
like
like times 100 because like especially if the class
right, because
was
it's right there. It's
yeah.
right there.
and
Yeah.
and there's also it's a bit different because like I was in a lot of engineering classes. Engineering professors don't prompt us in the middle. They
Mm,
lecture at us. So the classes that were most engaging was the one that I thought did best was Chip Ransler's Com 4680 class, and he would like bring in speakers. Like honestly, I think it's a good practice. I mean, some people found it annoying, force us to keep our cameras on, prompt us with
mm.
questions, so you're like alert the
There's
whole
social
time.
pressure.
Yeah, there's social pressure exactly.
Yeah.
And so other classes weren't like that for me. The only one that was Bevan. Again, these are the two professors who taught entrepreneurship 1010. They
Mm,
co-teach it, and Bevan's class is the I ended up taking his open source class, which was 10 people. We had conversations like this about like open source, some like new topic every week. So like we went open source energy, open source infrastructure, health, communication, all these things. And it kept me on my like I guess grind to like research and be able to go and have those conversations. But
mm.
lectures, like at that point, I was like, just submit a video if we need to. Uh,
Yeah, exactly.
and then the most I did learn again is everything through conversation. So like with Arena Labs, I would say that was probably like the most I learned the most technical things. So like what I would learn in school, the equivalent, like rather than taking like a CS class and learning Python and or HTML, CSS, I would like sit in meetings and they'd be like, "We have this project goal. We need to get it
Mm,
done in 2 weeks. Do you think you can do this?" And I would be watching YouTube videos, getting free books, reading it on my own, and that was the
yep.
best learning experience. So I think no class mimicked that experience. I mean,
Mm.
at least that I took.
Because it's self-directed,
Yeah,
baby.
itself. Yeah, exactly. So
Mm.
that's been my um like experience. I think the Zoom lectures are the so bad. They're just not no one's paying attention. Like no like I really don't know. Like I feel bad for the professors, honestly, because they're out there talking, but no one's paying attention. Like
Yeah,
I,
and it's
I
frustrating for both parties at that point, right? Because
yeah,
they know that no one's paying attention,
yeah.
right?
And then
Right? Because it's a performance. Like Brunel always talked about how like getting up in front of people and like talking through stuff is it's like acting. It's putting on a show, right? At
yeah,
least how he did it, which was really great. Um, and so when you don't have that feedback from the audience, right? It's way worse, right?
yeah,
And so I think that's why we're experiencing this like, man, online school sucks, right? It's like, well, no, like we can't. This is like the so Faith put in the chat too. Now whether there is a right thing when it comes to humanities work is up for debate. I totally agree because I don't think that there is a right thing. Because literally everything, right? There is no right wrong. There is no good bad,
yeah,
right? We live in a very complex world where things are just like lots of shades of gray, right? And so to say like doing online school is bad or worse or whatever is just like patently untrue.
yeah,
You can't make a definitive direct case like that because we haven't like experimented, tried everything. There's going to be new tools that come out, right? Like all this stuff. It's we need to like stop and think about like, hey, given the tools that given the cards I'm dealt, right? What's the best hand I can play, right? And I feel like we just like didn't give teachers, students, like anyone, because it was forced upon really suddenly, any like room to actually question that and make big experimental changes, right? Because there's so much externally changing that everybody was like, hey, I want to hold on to this thing that I know, right? I want things to stop changing, so I'm just going to do the thing that I know in this new context. That's the change. When really it should have been like, hey, I'm in a new context. Let me like think about completely reshaping my own behavior,
yeah.
because that's way harder.
Yeah, and I think also because they didn't shift, like school got easier for like a lot of people in many
Mm-hmm.
sense. Like I've heard so many people, like I bumped into someone honestly like random yesterday who just recognized me from my capstone presentation, their third year BME, and she like one of our like pivotal classes is in one that's in a lab ideas. It's called Ideas. It's a
Mm,
two-parter class. You do a lot of like
cool.
in person. You make like an ECG, and so that requires
Whoa.
circuitry. You there's like a lot of other, like you work with liposomes. So there's like a lot of different modules. I think there's like 9 over the course of the year, and they had to do it online. It's relatively like much easier, but it's like she was like, I feel like a fake BME, like in many senses, because it is. It's like things got easier. People like weren't doing the hands-on experience, and even there's so much.
People didn't feel as challenged,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Or like working towards anything. And those things, like those labs, you need to be in person, like labs outside. Like I always joke with my friend who's um going to Georgetown School of Medicine next year, like, oh, if you have like your third year, there I send them like memes all the times that are like doctor related. It's like you better start eating your apples and dropping the nicotine because your doctors in the future are currently cheating on their exam, like in like online school. I sent it to him and he was like, honestly, it might be the case. But like it is kind of like that's also a huge problem with that, like that online
Yeah.
portion, the Zoom. And it's because they didn't do exactly what you said. They didn't like readjust. Like you can't just like take that one, the drastic change happens and literally just try to mimic it. Like you have to find like workarounds. And then like the last thing I'll say on this is like also there's that social environment and what you learn. It's like there's so much benefit to like being in a lecture, and then when the teacher says something or professor says something that's like ridiculous, turning to like the person to your side and being like, do you get that? And then having a
Exactly.
conversation separately and then learning that way. And again, it's kind of like a little maker space where everyone's working, people can ask each other for help and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Was not
exactly.
mimicked, was not mimicked.
The oh my gosh, yeah, what you just like you brought stuff back. So in my physics class, right, the like big 600-person lecture, right, like you are like teeny one in like the 600. And so when your professor does something either confusing, dumb, like whatever it is, you can like turn and either snicker or whatever it is, and you
Yeah.
build bonds between the
Yeah.
people in your row, like all these things. So then it's like, hey, we have to study for the test, right? Like get like let's study together, right? It's
Yeah.
way harder to make that leap of, um, hey, we're now like gonna go do something together. We've got this like social bond that allows us to go together. If we didn't have that initial like, hey, we share same values in like again, right? It's this like cool common enemy dynamic,
Yeah.
right? That like it's we are together against this guy, right?
Yeah.
So interesting. Hey, friends. So we got 7 people now viewing back. Oh, somebody just left. But if you're new to the chat to the stream, we're talking about like kind of basically the process of education, like learning online, and how it ties into kind of our like internet ecosystem, like the creator ecosystem. So if you got any thoughts on this topic, feel free to dump them in the chat. If you agree, disagree, whatever with anything Joshua and I say, please, we want to have this be a productive conversation. So throw your thoughts in the chat below. Okay, so Joshua, as we like round out this discussion, let's tie it back to. Oh wait, Faith just put something in chat. Definitely harder definitely harder to fun of profs over Zoom. Harder to make fun of profs over Zoom, but possibly if you put your mind to
Wait, what?
it. So she said, like, it's definitely harder to make fun of professors over Zoom, but it's possible if you put your mind to it.
That's very true.
Yeah,
That's very true. It's a good
that's
point.
very true. Get wild group tests. We used to have like a CS like class of 2019 Facebook group. It stopped because there was like a huge cheating scandal. But I remember people would like post memes of professors and stuff in there. And again, it's like a lot of educational institutions are like anti that behavior. I think that it's like really important, right? Because what you're like really trying to say is like, hey, don't make fun of me. But you then have to ask the question of like sometimes why are they making fun of you, right? Like are you being, why is there this like animosity, right? Like why is it an us versus them mentality, right? And as you as the authority figure, it's like your fault, right?
Yeah.
But also like the outcome is that these people are learning to like behave well together, right? They're learning
Yeah.
behaviors of like cooperation and collaboration and all these things. That's why I find something I wrote in my thesis about cheating, because right, like in in a world online, in school online, it is way easier to cheat,
Yeah.
right? It's way easier to share knowledge and information between peers, right? Rather than it only being a one way, because that's what everybody's trying to solve for, is like, no, I only want the knowledge pass through and the pass through back, right? The assessment to be 1-to-1. Right, but that's literally not how any of our social structures work, right? It's a one to many, a many to many, right? All these things, that's what makes like humans really good. And so trying to quell that behavior, right, in favor of just this 1-to-1 is never going to work, right? Because it's like contrary to how we naturally operate, right? So what you really want to do is like make collaboration, that peer-to-peer, that many-to-many interaction, positive associated, right? You want to use that as a tool, right? Like naturally your students are good at that. So okay, cool, we're gonna do like the one of the greatest examples is like the class take-home assessment, right? Which is really, you just like do in the 1.5 hours, like everyone does the test together,
Yeah.
right? Where the professor is there too. Like it's this collaborative, hey, there are hard problems on the board. Let's all work together to like solve them. And whatever the grade is the grade for the whole class. Wow. Oh my gosh. That's creating a lot of like, oh my, I have to pull my weight. I need to rely on this person, right? We start to see social hierarchy of like, hey, this person has paid really fucking great attention. Let's like amp that person up,
Yeah.
right? Right?
Yeah.
Like we need to gas that person, and it's really happens. Like I know it from even my own experience at UVA, right? It was like all of a sudden the person that you might have like poked fun at because they were like the teacher's pet, right, is all of a sudden the person that everybody is groveling towards.
Yeah.
It's
so
like
true.
it's like, oh my gosh, you're our only hope, right? Like what can I do to make you more comfortable as you like take this test, right?
Yeah.
Right. And again, that's what it happens when you change incentive structure and change like social ecosystem. And I feel like that stuff is really important, is the stuff that like people don't think about, even though that's the stuff that like then you put that person in a new context and environment. That's the stuff that's important that they remember. It's right, how to operate together, how to work collaboratively, all these things, the things that like companies always publish to higher education institutions about like the stuff that we're looking for is always that.
Yeah.
Right, it's never like we need them to know the way of doing what is it, like Taylor transforms through like no one is ever saying that. Like
Yeah.
and so the fact that that is what's being assessed is like super dumb.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So what do you think though from the individual level? Because there's obviously like lots of benefit. Like yeah, socially, we have to work in teams, but like
Mhm.
from what do you think also is the good incentive structure at the individual level to like promote, like the individual learning, so these people can all come together and work? Because there is definitely like, I think that was the goal obviously with schooling, with like individual tests, is like to make sure
Mhm.
each individual has something to contribute.
Right.
I'm just curious to like kind of prompt you the other direction from like the social aspect to learning. What do you think is the best way to go about like the individual learning?
Yeah,
And
that's super.
also maybe prompt Faith, because Faith has probably way more knowledge than both of us, so, or does have way more
Exactly.
knowledge. I bet it on it. So like curious to see what she thinks.
Yeah, and so I talked about this a teeny bit in my thesis, which was basically like how obsessed we are with individualism. like like since the 1900s, essentially, we were been like, or basically the late 1800s, we've been obsessed with people as like this. And even before that, you can think of like the founding of America as kind of the early idea of this like manifest destiny, like
Yeah.
pull you up by your bootstraps, go out, like we're praising that kind of behavior, when again in reality, like that sucks. That's really bad for humans for everybody to be their own like independent operator and to not think about others,
Yeah.
right? Because literally the only way we survive is that we have a vested interest in keeping that other person next to us alive, because we're better with them, right? So, but I do see some merit to the idea of like, how do you train people to not be externally reliant all the time, right? The idea of self-reliance is important because it's not really so much self-reliance, it's the ability that I as myself can contribute,
Yeah.
right? That I have something to offer the group, right? Because if I don't have something to offer the group, I get cut, right? Because if we like take it again back to like our anthropological roots, right? It's the person that has is not like contributing, not pulling their weight, right? But is still eating, right? That's a liability, because then if resources go down, like things get short, that person gets cut,
Yeah.
right? That's the person that we all like
Boot out.
lash
Yeah.
out and attack against, right? We all know this, even if you think about it as like a less extreme example of the person in the group project, right? When peer assessments come around, that person gets fucked, right? Especially if the project didn't go well,
Yeah.
right? Right? Because again, resources are low, right? The grade is bad, right? So that person gets fucked up.
This
And so what we're trying to do by teaching people to work individually, to find intrinsic motivation, go out, learn new things like on their own, seek out that behavior, is like, hey, you on your own need to learn how to like operate independently, so that if somebody in your group needs you to operate independently, you can do that.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And
Yeah.
I need to tell a funny story based off that example,
Okay.
but I recently heard through Capstone, through a friend of a friend, my friend Rohan was telling me this, that someone was his friend was in a group project for Capstone, and one of the team members, they were like, they had, I think, partnered up with a researcher, a professor, to do their research, and the professor was pretty strict on deadlines, so like they were all
Mm.
struggling, except one student was literally like at the group meetings, like drinking, putting on makeup to go out, like all these things. They took a screenshot of several instances, and they got so fed up at the end of the semester, they just sent it the professor and was like, I think this like
Speaks for
enough,
itself.
it explains itself. And I was just like, holy crap, like could you imagine that? I was laughing like on the floor, but like, oh, that's just yeah, literally prime example. I found this out the other day. It was a capstone, so it's like someone in my class, but it's crazy.
Yeah. And again, and I will say again, like that behavior should be prevented, right? By teaching that person that it's important to contribute, right? It's a mutual respect between you and your
Yeah,
peers. But that behavior of like, we are now turning against the person is really good correction, right?
yeah,
Because it's not correction essentially from authority, which might be not respected, right? It's correction from peers, right? Which is again the thing that starts to happen in middle and high school, right?
yeah,
It's the snapback, and that person will remember that hopefully much more, right? Than if the teacher had just said like, "Hey, I like in CS it was always like, hey, you didn't put in a lot of commit messages." Right, one person is always committing all the code, right?
yeah,
Because that's a good tell that like that person wrote all the code. But it's like it's still not as good as like the person that you were supposed to be on a team with turning against you,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And again, I'm always in favor of like us teaching that behavior to not happen before it happens, but it's really important that that does happen. And if we only have this like individualized model of learning where it's only ever the relationship between the teacher and the learner, we're missing all of that,
yeah.
right? We don't get to teach any of that stuff. Faith said, "Oh baby, I'm going to have to dig through to find this paper I'm thinking of." But she said it was a paper on how neoliberalism penetrates and affects how we see the system of education. Exactly, right? It's this idea that like it's down to everyone as an individual, right?
Yeah,
And even in neoliberalism, it's then how this like it's because a lot of this again, right, anti-capitalist entrepreneurs, right, like has its roots in this like our capitalistic economy, right, where it's this idea that like a single person, entity, whatever, it's up to them, given the context of like what the market wants and everything, to like do this thing. What again is missing from that perspective is like the market is people, right?
yeah,
Like capitalism is this like big giant collaboration that then has a bunch of incentive structures that makes it like really really good for a smaller and smaller amount of people. It's a zero sum game, which is like the bad thing. But what's good about it is that it's this like open collaborative ecosystem of like what social cues and pressure, right, affect different behavior, right? And that's also the thing that needs to get checked, because like given just buck wild social cues behavior in this like big system, right, that's why we have pollutants as like our biggest form of energy when we knew about electricity, like it just wasn't as efficient, right?
Yeah.
Like when we were deciding whether or not to do the steam engine, right? Like the coal powered steam engine, right? Because it's electricity would have taken longer, right? But the after effects, like there's this really really good YouTube video about like literally what would have happened if like inventions were like flipped like in a different order, right?
Oh,
And so if we had like electric vehicles, right, like before we had steam engine, right, like how
yeah.
like wild that would have happened, and how like way better like in terms of a technological progression we could be on. So again, that's like this is what's happening is there's like a bunch of socioeconomic and political factors that are coming together because it's all social based, to cause people to have different incentives to perform different behaviors. Because literally we are social creatures,
Yeah.
and that is like the thing that makes us good. It's our hamartia,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, like that's just what it is. And so we just need to focus on like making sure it's a net positive for the
Yeah.
story we tell as humanity.
Yeah. Very critical.
Some would say existential.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Faith said, "I'm sorry. Are you talking about steampunk right now?" No. Faith is popping off in the chat. I love it. Okay, friends. Well, we are sitting here at 10 a.m. Joshua has to go because he has with the gas shortage. Again, we're talking about gasoline energy, right? If
Yeah.
only we had gotten electricity. But right, you're like picking up your parents or something, driving them somewhere.
I'm gonna like drive up to Nova today to see my mom
Nice.
and might have to pick her up from the airport. So
Nice, super cool. Well, good luck, Joshua. Thank you as always for being here. Everybody in the chat, thanks for being here. Faith, thanks for popping off. This was a great conversation. I just, as you could tell, I love this topic very dearly. So we'll have to have some sort of follow up.
yeah, for sure.
All right, friends. Well, we will see you next time. We're gonna have like a little marketing meeting to decide whether or not we're gonna change the time of Lumastic Live. So follow us on Instagram at This Is Lumastic and Twitter at This Is Lumastic, to see if we do end up changing that time. Boom, friends. Have great weekends, and we'll see you next time.
See you.
Bye, Joshua.
Bye.
Faith said dab. Excellent.
Cool.